This day in sports history. This episode is brought to you by Stirling Roastery. For several months you've heard me talking about the great products and scents offered by the Stirling Soap Company. And while there may not seem to be any correlation between soap and coffee, what is similar is the same care and attention to detail in delivering great products to their customers. Stirling Roastery will ship great-tasting beans or ground coffee, for whatever coffee-making process you prefer, right to your door. I gave their breakfast blend a try recently, and I can tell you, it was a great way to get my day kick-started with this smooth, medium blend. And just like their soaps, they have a variety to choose from. Give Stirling Roastery a try at stirlingsoap.com. And welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History. I am your host, Steve White, for another trip up and down the sports history timeline. This podcast is a member of the Sports History Network. Check out sportshistorynetwork.com for more cool podcasts and a whole lot more info. It's November 11th, and on this day throughout sports history, we had an epic upset. Derrick Thomas had an epic day, but in a losing effort. And an epic prank was pulled prior to a college football game. All that plus a little more, including a non-sports fun fact, guaranteed to have at least one Easter egg. Let's start with what happened on this day in 1911, when Jim Thorpe and the Carlisle Indian School pulled a huge upset over Harvard, one of the early 20th century football powers. Now, it's kind of hard to really put this into perspective. I could tell you, like all the other football historians, that this was a huge upset, and you'd believe me, right? But would it resonate? There are modern-day football examples that are easy to understand. There's Howard beating UNLV in 2017, Temple beating Virginia Tech in 1998, and of course, Appalachian State taking down Michigan in 2007. Now, I would argue that Carlisle beating Harvard on this day in 1911 is at least in that category of statistically improbable wins, if not the greatest of all those mentioned. It was a battle of the have-it-alls and the don't have very much. Tiny Carlisle only had 16 players make this trip. Powerhouse Harvard had 50 on their sideline. Not only did they have triple their numbers, but most of them were double the size of the Carlisle players. Carlisle was coached by Pop Warner, one of the great early minds of football. He was the first to incorporate trick plays into his game plan, and he had a couple ready to deploy against the Crimson 11. Harvard was coached by Percy Halton, who did not like Warner at all. He respected him and his lowly Indian kids even less. So much so, Halton was not even at the game. Instead, he went to scout Yale in New Haven, Connecticut. Before he left, though, he told his assistant coach to rest his first-team boys. His second and third stringers would handle Pop Warner's boys easily enough. Of course, Carlisle did have Jim Thorpe, the greatest athlete of the first half of the 20th century, but Thorpe was not 100% for this game. He'd sprained his ankle the week before in a win at Penn. Thorpe said that Warner encased his injured ankle in adhesive plaster and then taped it up. He felt like an Egyptian mummy, but it allowed him to play. Well, it really was never a question of whether he would play, but more how effective would he be? Answer? Very. When the Carlisle team walked out on the field for the first time, the crimson-clad crowd was shouting, "Kill the Indians!" Now, those kids had faced and heard worse. They were not fazed, and they were determined to show what their little football team could do. They started off using a little misdirection, and they ran a couple of reverses with Thorpe racking up yards. They couldn't punch it into the end zone, though, but Thorpe, who was also the kicker, booted a 13-yarder for the first points of the afternoon. Harvard's second stringers could not move the ball very well either, and they settled for a field goal of their own. Thorpe kicked a 43-yarder later in the half to put Carlisle back on top. When Thorpe attempted his third field goal of the half, though, Harvard blocked it, scooped it, and took it into the end zone for the score. It was 9-6 Harvard at the half. Now, at that point, it was time for Pop Warner to unveil the trick play that he'd really been working on for a while. He wasn't sure if it was completely legal, but he was going to give it a shot anyway. Set to receive the ball to start the second half, Warner called for the hidden ball play. Jimmy Johnson caught it. The Carlisle players created a quick huddle. The ball was stuck in a sewn-in pocket of another player's jersey. The huddle broke, and the players ran in different directions. The Harvard 11 had no idea which player possessed the ball. They didn't score on the play, but it did set up Thorpe's third field goal. Thorpe nearly scored a touchdown in the third, but was stopped just shy of the end zone. They faked a reverse, and Alex Arcasa scored for Carlisle. They now led 15-9, but they knew they probably needed a few more points. At that point, the Harvard starters made their first appearance, but still, the Crimson had trouble moving the ball. The Carlisle defense was holding strong. As time waned in the fourth quarter, a Carlisle drive stalled at the Harvard 48-yard line. Warner told Thorpe to kick the field goal. Thorpe was stunned and said, "Who ever heard of a field goal from there? Punt the ball, coach." Warner was insistent. "Nope, you're going to make it, Jim." So, I don't know the exact distance, but it was around a 55-yard attempt. Even with his bad ankle wrapped like a mummy, Thorpe said he hit it pure and solid, and the ball went through the uprights with plenty of room to spare. 18-9 Carlisle. They tried to add another shorter field goal a few minutes later, but once again, Harvard blocked it and ran in another one. But that was it. Tiny Carlisle had beaten mighty Harvard 18-15. And for a little more perspective, Harvard would not lose another football game for nearly 4 years. Thorpe had to be carried off the field because of the pain in his ankle. He played the entire game, rushed for 173 of the team's 334 yards, kicked 4 field goals, and led his team to one of the greatest upsets in college football history. The Harvard fans who'd screamed, "Kill the Indians," prior to the game, cheered Thorpe and the Carlisle Indian School team in their incredible effort that day. Thorpe called it the best day of his life. This episode is brought to you by Firefly Books. From frozen ponds in small-town Canada to packed arenas under bright lights, hockey's journey is 150 years strong. Hockey Hall of Fame Timeline of the Game takes you through it all. 8 defining eras, hundreds of rare photos, legendary names, game-changing moments. Created with the Hockey Hall of Fame, this book is a visual time capsule of the sport's most iconic chapters. Whether you're a die-hard fan or looking for the ultimate holiday gift, Timeline of the Game is a must-have for every hockey lover. Pick up your copy today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or bookshop.org. On this day 40 years ago, Philadelphia Flyers goalie Pelle Lindbergh died after being involved in a car accident. Lindbergh was the reigning Vezina winner, the award given to the NHL's top goalie. He'd led the league in wins and saves the previous season, a year that saw the Flyers advance to the Stanley Cup Finals but lose to the Edmonton Oilers in 5 games. Pelle was a star in the league whose stock was on the rise, and many believed he was going to be the first goalie to lead the team back to hoisting the cup since Bernie Parent. Parent had been a mentor and a father figure to Lindbergh. In fact, it had been Parent who'd presented him with the Vezina Trophy the previous summer. Pelle had not played in the Flyers' win against Boston on the 9th, and with no practice scheduled for Sunday the 10th, a few of the players went out for drinks after the game. They went to a bar at the Coliseum in Voorhees, New Jersey, a skating rink and nightclub where the Flyers practiced. In the early morning hours of the 10th, Lindbergh climbed behind the wheel of his Porsche 930 Turbo. 2 friends joined him in the car, Ed Parvin and Kathy McNeil. At 5:41 a.m., Lindbergh was driving through Somerdale, New Jersey, when his car slammed into a brick wall of an elementary school. It was estimated he was doing 80 in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. Once paramedics arrived on scene, it took 15 minutes to extricate Pelle from the car. During that time, he'd stopped breathing. CPR was performed on site, and then he was transported to the hospital. McNeil and Pervin were both seriously injured and transported to the hospital as well, but they survived. Lindbergh was not so fortunate. He'd sustained major trauma to his brain and brain stem. He was placed on a ventilator, but it was soon determined he was brain dead, with no possibility of recovery. It was later determined his blood alcohol level was 0.24, well over the legal limit. When he was removed from life support on this day, he was surrounded by his mom and dad, his fiancée, and Bernie Perrant, who said he was holding Pelle's hand when he stopped breathing. Pelle Lindbergh was 26. The Flyers played inspired hockey the rest of the year, keeping the memory of Lindbergh close to their hearts. They won 7 of their next 9 games and went on to win the Patrick Division before losing in the first round of the playoffs to the New York Rangers. On this day in 1990, Kansas City Chief linebacker Derrick was a major disruptor for the Seattle Seahawks. Thomas was able to get to Seattle Seahawk quarterback Dave Kreig and sack him 7 times. That was enough to set the NFL record, and it is still the record today for sacks by one player in a game. But if only he'd picked up sack number 8, the outcome of the game would have been different. The Seahawks trailed the Chiefs 16-10 in the final minute of the game. Kreig dropped back to pass, and once again, it looked like Thomas was going to bring him down. He just couldn't wrap him up. When Kreig wriggled free, he lofted a 25-yard pass into the end zone that was caught for the tying touchdown. The PAT gave Seattle the 1-point win, despite Derrick Thomas's heroic 7-sack performance. So I've talked about some interesting pranks on this podcast in the past. Heck, just a few days ago, I talked about how Auburn students greased the train tracks prior to a game with Georgia Tech. Well, on this day in 1961, a University of South Carolina fraternity pulled off a prank against in-state rival Clemson. The game was played in Columbia in '61, and the Sigma Nu fraternity came up with an idea to impersonate the Clemson team in pregame warm-ups. They procured jerseys from a local high school that had the same orange and purple colors of the Tigers and practiced a routine of running onto the field, doing some funny calisthenics, and then a series of intentional displays of ineptitude to poke fun at their rival. And so on this day, the disguised Sigma Nus came streaming out of the southeast corner of the end zone, and Clemson fans went wild, cheering and yelling, "Here come the Tigers!" The Clemson cannon fired, and the band broke into "Hold That Tiger." Another Sigma Nu was dressed as Tigers head coach Frank Howard, wearing a pillow under his shirt, and he came ambling out onto the field, spitting copious amounts of tobacco juice. One participant who did not make an appearance, though it was planned, was a cow named Bessie, who was slated to be introduced as the Clemson homecoming queen. It wasn't until the fake quarterback started fumbling the football incessantly, the punter kicked the football backwards, and the running backs were doing some pre-snap somersaults that Tiger fans began to suspect that this was not their team. Clemson students began pouring onto the field, followed by several Tiger fans, and they started chasing around the frat guys dressed as Tiger players. Punches were thrown, but those thrown by Clemson fans landed on hard plastic helmets and shoulder pads. Gamecock fans began to laugh and appreciate the chaos. The field was soon cleared, but the story did not die. The prank and ensuing riot were reported in papers across the country. And the game? Well, maybe the prank had an effect, because a not very good South Carolina team beat a not very good Clemson team 21-14. And on this day in 2007, Phil Mickelson had his oddest win as a professional golfer. This was the final round of the HSBC Champions of China in Shanghai, and the fun started when he made the turn. Mickelson would later say it was the oddest back nine he ever played in his life. In the final 9 holes of the tournament, Mickelson was penalized 6 shots. He had a 3-shot lead with 7 to play, but would drop 4 shots in the next 4 holes, and he trailed Ross Fisher by a shot when he came to the 18th, a 535-yard par 5. Mickelson hit his approach into the water and figured the tournament was lost. But Fisher's shot from deep rough rolled through the green and found its way into the water hazard as well. A penalty stroke, a chip, and 2 putts, and it was a double bogey for Fisher. Mickelson actually had a 10-foot putt to win it, but it slid by, and it was a 3-player playoff with Lee Westwood joining the fun. Mickelson ended his roller coaster ride when he rolled in a 4-foot birdie putt on the second playoff hole to win his first pro tournament in Asia. And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Have you ever heard the term Easter egg as a reference for something to be found in a movie or a video game? Well, one theory as to the origin of that says that the movie Rocky Horror Picture Show is the source. During production, actors hid actual eggs on set for others to find. Several were not found and actually show up in the movie. That's it for this edition, but as the name implies, I'll be back tomorrow with another This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.